Hello my fiery friends, the Infernoman here with our latest gameplay and deck tech video to show you. In this series we highlight a random deck on MTG Arena, and it can range from a spicy homebrew to a tier 1 meta deck that is hot on ranked. And if you do enjoy these videos that we make, all I ask for you is to give a like on this video and subscribe to the channel, as I would greatly appreciate your support. Now, if you like the deck we're playing today, I'll leave a link in the details below so you can give it a spin for yourself on Arena. Keep in mind that these videos will be pure gameplay, no commentary style, so you can enjoy the game, but if you do want to hear my deck tech analysis and thoughts, I'll leave that at the end of the gameplay. So without further ado, let's take the deck that you see right now and get started. And there you have it, everybody. That was our human tribal deck for you. So here are my thoughts overall with the deck after playing with it for the past week. I actually have been enjoying the deck, but I'm not sure if 3 colors is actually right. Well, technically 4 colors, which we'll get to in just a second. But otherwise, the main game plan, as you kind of saw with it, is we just kind of fairly play out our 1, 2, and 3 drops and just hopefully just overwhelm our opponent with our value. There are a handful of lords in our deck that, of course, that are going to try to take advantage of the fact that our opponent is going to be obviously removing our threats. So expect that with this deck. But that's why I kind of designed the deck to accept sacrifice when we need to. And of course, we have a little bit of recursion just to make sure that we can still come back even after, say, removal or board wipes. But otherwise, let's go over this real quick before I give any additional thoughts. So you probably have seen many of these humans before. None of them are really going to be too much of a surprise to you, but realistically, we have Lunar Veterans for life gain, Draven Inspectors to give us that clue token, decent blocker in the early game. Well, single copy of Hero Precinct 1, since we do have a lot of multicolor spells, so we want to hopefully generate a couple more human tokens. Thalia's to throw off our opponents in the early game, of course, with the non-creature spells costing 1 more to cast, and we only have a couple of non-creature spells in this deck, since it's mostly creature-focused. A single copy of Thalia's Lieutenant, so we can pump up our board in the mid to late game. Priest of the Forgotten Gods, so we could sack away some of our weaker threats and hopefully pick off our opponent's 1 or 2 big threats that they have on the board. General's Enforcers, since we have a lot of legendary creatures, so we want to make sure they are protected with giving them Indestructible. A Fireblade Artist, it may seem a little strange in the deck to have a single copy of Fireblade Artist, but this is again just to do a little extra damage to get through some chump blockers. Sometimes pairing this with Judith gives us a little bit more damage if we have to in a pinch. Stormfist Crusader, a couple of copies of that just to help churn through our deck. We lose some life, but as long as we keep playing humans, our Lunar Veteran will keep our life total high. Single copy of Baird Evergen Recruiter. This is again just to create some more tokens. They're not human tokens, but they still can gum up the board against our opponent. A single copy of Bereaved Survivor, which also looks a little odd, but trust me, when this thing flips, a lot of people underestimate what this card is capable of. So when it does flip, we can then return a creature card with a mana value of 2 or less from our graveyard to the battlefield, tapped and attacking when we attack with this card when it flips to Dauntless Avenger. That single copy actually does help out when people don't expect it. Alicia, Who Smiles at Death, kind of also is the same thing as the Bereaved Survivor, but again, it's legendary. However, it brings back creatures with a power 2 or less, so that gives us a little flexibility with some of our cards, such as Judith the Scourge Diva, which we really want on the board. Other lords we have are General Kudro of Draneth. This is a really solid human lord for us, and of course we use it for mostly the Graveyard Hate. Judith the Scourge Diva, one of the main reasons why we're playing the deck, it allows us to be very aggressive, and even if our humans die, we can then start picking off our opponent's other creatures bit by bit, or slowly start draining them out. Tactic Legion's Edge is in this deck just to make sure that we don't have a lot of burn spells hurting us, because it prevents non-creature damage that would be dealt to other creatures we control. And a single 4-drop, which is Garna Bloodfist of Keld. So whenever another creature you control dies, you draw a card if it was attacking. Otherwise, the Bloodfist deals 1 damage to each opponent. Of course, the main reason why we're using this card is, even though it doesn't really synergize too much with something like Call of the Death Dweller, that single Garna sometimes can either help us refuel our hand after an aggressive move, or we can just hold off on everything on the board, hopefully again draining out our opponent with Judith as well on top of that. Speaking of which, Call of the Death Dweller just brings back our creature cards from the graveyard to the battlefield with a value of 3 or less, and as you see, aside from that Garna, it basically can hit everything, which is really good. If we chime this in with Priest of the Forgotten Gods, we can then recur against some of our weak stuff. We can go off really quickly. One cute option I haven't mentioned, that if you haven't seen this before, use Call of the Death Dweller to bring back a Judith and then put that Death Touch counter on top of Judith. So this way, if you have to sacrifice stuff or things die, Judith's ability now has Death Touch. We can then pick off creatures that are far above her power level. Just keep that in mind. Your mana base is pretty much going to be a little bit different than normal. A single copy of Castle Ardenvale, a plain, a swamp, Pathway lands, shock lands, which seems standard, but since we are mostly a creature focused deck, we're going to actually use Secluded Courtyard, and we will have a full set of unclaimed territory to help us fix our mana base. You do notice that if you haven't seen it, I don't have a single red source aside from the Triumphs, which again may seem a little risky, but trust me, those courtyards in the unclaimed territory, since we don't have that many non-creature spells, makes it a lot easier of us and safer to use. Sideboard is a little hodgepodge of everything. Since we want to maintain, of course, our focus of just being a creature heavy deck, we will have copies of Dauntless Bodyguard for protection, a single copy of Cathar Commando we can sacrifice to destroy an artifact or enchantment, Containment Priest to then stop anything that wasn't cast coming into the battlefield, a single copy of Draneth Magistrate to stop any exile heavy decks, another copy of Call of Death Dweller, 2 Deafening Silence, since again this is stopping the control decks out there. A Campbell Console Allocation, again this is to stop those combo decks, to stop those control decks out there. Rem, this is mostly again just to stack up with Tajic. This is just again to prevent that non-creature damage that may be swung at us. 2 copies of King Darien if we do need to have a better set of protection lords versus, say, General Kudro, and then we can sacrifice the king itself to give our entire team hexproof and indestructible in a pinch. And then a single copy that can replace Garna if we have to, and we're going to have to grind it out a lot more, Outlaw's Merriment, which allows us to either make a 3-1 human warrior with trample and haste, a 2-1 human cleric with lifelink and haste, or a 1-2 human rogue with haste and dealing 1 damage to any target when it enters the battlefield. So there you go, that's mostly going to be it for the deck. My final thoughts again is I like playing the deck, but I don't know if maybe we should even just dare say go into full 4-5 colors with this deck. You can see, of course, as I just said, the sideboard, we are splashing for green to technically be a 4-color deck, but it's primarily a 3-color deck. Many of our humans in this version want to be sacrificed, want to generate more value so we can then do a little bit more damage and push our opponent beyond the point where they can't really just do much, or they're punished for wrathing us with some of our other threats. The way again you want to play this is, since we are a fair deck, don't be surprised if your opponent sometimes may do 1 by 1 picking us off. So when you have to, you might have to just do, instead of just 1, 2, 3 on your 1, 2, and 3 turns, is kind of adjust and might have to play around either counter spells or removal just to throw off your opponent's game plan. Don't be afraid to be aggressive with cards like, say, Thalia or Tajic when you do have a lot of opponents dealing with burn spells, because it will punish them, of course, by taxing them when they need to, throwing them off their curve. Of course, the one final takeaway I would just give you for this is there's a lot of versions of humans decks out there. You can go for a beatdown plan, you could do a sacrifice deck like I can, you can go single monocolor and go taxing, or you can go full 5-color, just pure value pile. One of the things I highly encourage is, even though the version that I have on screen right now is the one I like to play, go ahead and experiment with humans. There's a ton of them out there, and there's different variants of this deck. So it can be a little complicated to figure out which version you may be happy with, but at the same time, it's also kind of fun because you have a lot more to work with versus, say, other tribes. That's all I have for you today. Thanks again for watching, everyone. And just remember that no matter what you do play in the game of life, always be sure to burn bright. Later!